It's just hair. That's what my husband said as our little girl sobbed on her 6th birthday. Mother had just shaved her bald in front of everyone to mock her for being black. The room laughed. But what they didn't know was that I had secrets. And once I revealed them, nothing in this family would ever be the same. This is Voice of Sephora. Subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The night they mocked my daughter was the night I planned their downfall.
The morning of Sophie's birthday began with laughter and balloons. She was 6 years old that day, twirling around the kitchen in her bright yellow dress, her curls bouncing as she spun. Her cheeks glowed with the excitement only children carry when they know a party is coming. She came running toward me, her little hands clutching a silver box wrapped neatly with a red bow. "Mummy, look what Grandma gave me!" she shouted, her voice bubbling with joy. My smile froze. Margaret, my mother-in-law, was not a woman who gave without intention. Her gifts always came with a sting. My chest tightened as I knelt to Sophie's level. "Shall we open it together, darling?" I asked gently. Sophie nodded eagerly, ripping at the shiny paper. The lid lifted. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be a necklace, or a doll, or maybe even the storybook Sophie had been wishing for. But the moment I saw the cold glint of steel, my breath caught. Inside the box lay a brand new pair of electric clippers. Sophie's smile faltered. She looked confused. "Mommy, is this for Daddy?" she asked, her small voice hesitant. Before I could answer, Margaret's voice slid into the room like a blade. "No, darling, it's for you. Every princess deserves to look presentable." That word, presentable, my stomach knotted. It wasn't about neatness. It never was. It was her coded way of saying, "You don't belong. You'll never be good enough." I rose slowly, holding Sophie close. "Margaret, how dare you?" My voice shook with rage. Margaret's painted lips curled into a smile. "Anna, it's just a gift. Don't be so sensitive." From the living room, Daniel's voice carried through, casual and dismissive. "Anna, relax. It's just hair. Don't turn this into a fight." Just hair. He always said that. My blood boiled. But Sophie's little eyes were on me, so I forced a smile for her sake. "Go and play with your balloons, darling. We'll get ready soon." She ran off, her laughter returning as quickly as it had gone. When she was gone, I turned back to Margaret. "If you ever touch her hair—" She cut me off with a laugh, sharp and mocking. "You'll do what? You forget whose house this is? My son's house. You're just passing through." The words stung deeper than she knew, because Daniel never contradicted her. He never defended me. He never defended Sophie. In Margaret's eyes, we were both outsiders. The rest of the morning passed like a storm hiding behind sunshine. Streamers were hung, children's voices filled the rooms, and Sophie twirled again, glowing in her yellow dress. But the shadow never left me. Every time Margaret glanced at her, my chest tightened. Every time Daniel chuckled at one of his mother's remarks, my rage burned hotter. I told myself Margaret wouldn't dare. Not here. Not on Sophie's birthday. But deep down, I knew the truth. Margaret's cruelty was never random. It was planned, precise, like the snip of a pair of scissors. I thought back to the day Sophie was born. Margaret had refused to hold her, sniffing to a relative. "She looks nothing like us." The words had branded me, and they returned now, echoing in my head as Sophie played among balloons and confetti. As the clock ticked closer to the party, guests arrived with gifts and cheerful greetings. The air was filled with chatter, laughter, and the sugary scent of cake icing. Sophie beamed, her cheeks glowing with joy, unaware of the trap, waiting. Margaret moved through the crowd with calm precision, greeting relatives, pouring drinks, smiling at neighbors. But when she looked at Sophie, her smile changed, sharper, crueler. And then, just before the cake was brought out, Margaret clapped her hands and called out above the noise, "Everyone, before we light the candles, I have a special surprise for Sophie." My heart sank like a stone. The guests turned toward Sophie, who sat in her chair, her yellow dress shining under the lights. Margaret reached into her bag with a smile that chilled me to the bone. The room hushed as Margaret's voice cut through the chatter. "Before the cake, let's give Sophie a gift she'll never forget." She held Sophie's small hand and led her toward the center of the living room. The guests watched curiously, some smiling, some whispering. Sophie looked confused but obedient. She trusted her grandmother. Margaret placed her in a chair. "Sit up straight, darling," she cooed, her tone sickly sweet. Then, with a calmness that turned my blood cold, she reached into her handbag and pulled out the clippers. The sharp buzz filled the room. For a moment, no one moved. The sound alone felt violent. Sophie's eyes widened. She clutched the hem of her yellow dress and whispered, "Mummy?" I shot forward. "Margaret, stop!" But Margaret pressed Sophie's shoulders down with surprising force. "Hold still, darling," she commanded. "This is for your own good." The clippers met Sophie's soft curls. Black strands fell to the carpet like tiny feathers. Sophie's face crumpled as tears rolled down her cheeks. She whimpered, "Mummy, it hurts." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked away. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. But not a single person moved to stop her. Margaret laughed. Laughed. She said loudly, "There we are. No more wild mess. Doesn't she look better already?" Sophie sobbed, her small body trembling. My chest ached with helpless rage. I turned to Daniel. He sat back on the sofa, arms folded, his face completely calm. He didn't move. He didn't protest. He didn't defend his daughter. He simply shook his head at me and said the words that burned into my soul. "Anna, stop being dramatic. It's just hair." Just hair. As if dignity was nothing. As if identity was nothing. As if Sophie's tears were nothing. I shouted over the buzz of the clippers, but my words were drowned by laughter. Margaret was enjoying herself too much, playing to the crowd as though this was a party trick, not cruelty. Some of the relatives chuckled nervously, unwilling to cross her. A cousin muttered, "Good discipline." My stomach turned. When the clippers finally went silent, Sophie's head was nearly bare. Her scalp shone under the living room lights. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her yellow dress damp from crying. She buried her face in my chest when I rushed to scoop her up. Margaret stood behind us, triumphant. "See? Much neater. She might even pass for decent now." The words cut me deeper than the clippers had cut Sophie's hair. I held my daughter close, whispering, "You're beautiful, my love. You're perfect." She sobbed against my shoulder, trembling like a leaf in the wind. Daniel didn't move. He didn't come to her. He didn't come to me. His silence was an answer more painful than words. As the party stumbled on awkwardly, with guests pretending to recover the mood, I noticed something. A woman from Sophie's school, another parent, was standing near the corner, her phone angled slightly. Her eyes met mine. She gave a quick, guilty nod, then slipped her phone back into her bag. My breath caught. Had she filmed it? That night, when I held Sophie in my arms, her bald head pressed against my chest, I thought about that parent, about the phone, about the way she looked at me. Somewhere in that device was the truth. Proof of the cruelty, evidence of the laughter, a weapon I might need. I didn't know it then, but that shaky recording would become the first stone I threw back at them. That night, long after the guests had gone, I lay awake with Sophie curled against me. My little girl's scalp was raw, and she winced each time I stroked her head. Her sobs had quieted into soft whimpers. I whispered to her until she finally drifted to sleep. But my mind didn't rest. The clippers weren't just cruelty, they were the final strike in a pattern I had ignored for far too long. I remembered the day Daniel and I got married. Margaret wore black, not because she was mourning, but because she wanted everyone to think the wedding was a funeral. She refused to toast us, and when the photographer tried to get her into a family picture, she walked away, muttering loud enough for my bridesmaids to hear, "This isn't the marriage I wanted for my son." Then came Sophie's birth. I still see it clearly. The sterile hospital room, the sound of a baby's first cry, and Margaret's face when the nurse handed her the bundle of joy. She didn't even reach out to hold her granddaughter. Instead, she sniffed and whispered to a cousin at the foot of the bed, "She looks nothing like us, nothing at all." And birthdays. Every year, Margaret found a way to ruin them. On Sophie's third birthday, she showed up late and brought no gift, only a comb and a bottle of hair oil. She made a show of holding the comb up in front of relatives, saying, "This is what she really needs. Maybe then her hair won't look so wild." The laughter had stung more than the cheap gift. On Sophie's fourth birthday, Margaret bought Daniel an expensive watch, ignoring the little girl whose name was on the cake. On her fifth, she pretended to forget it altogether, only arriving at the last moment to criticize my decorations. "Too bright, too loud, too much," she said, like Sophie's joy was an inconvenience. And now, her sixth birthday. This time she had gone further, planned it, publicly humiliated my child, shaved her bare for everyone to laugh at, then dismissed it as a joke. The memories strung together like beads on a wire, each one cutting deeper than the last. I realized it had never been random. Margaret had been building toward this moment for years, each insult sharper, each act crueler, until she struck at the core of who Sophie was. Daniel's part in it was worse. His silence wasn't new either. He had stood back at the wedding, he had laughed off the hospital whisper, he had rolled his eyes at the cruel gifts, and now he had smirked while his mother stripped his daughter of dignity. He wasn't just blind, he was complicit. I rose from bed quietly, careful not to wake Sophie. My steps carried me to the hallway, Margaret's polished wood floor creaking under my weight. My chest burned with anger, but my hands were steady. I wasn't searching for comfort anymore. I was searching for proof. I knew Margaret's habits. She kept receipts for everything, tucked away like trophies. A locked drawer in her side table had always been her little archive. I bent low, sliding the drawer open. Papers shuffled beneath my fingertips. Grocery slips, dry cleaning tickets, charity dinner notes. Then I found it. A small folded slip from a high-street barber supply shop. My pulse quickened as I read the printed words. "Professional clippers, purchased 3 days ago." My vision blurred with rage. It hadn't been spontaneous. It hadn't been in the heat of the moment. Margaret had gone out, paid money, and planned this days in advance. As I stared at the slip of paper in my hand, the walls of the house seemed to close in. I could hear her laughter echoing through my memory, the buzz of the clippers, Sophie's cries. This was no accident. It was a weapon. And now I had the receipt, proof that she had sharpened that weapon long before the birthday began. What I didn't know yet was that Daniel had his own secret tucked away, and his betrayal would cut even deeper. The receipt for the clippers still burned in my hand when another thought crept into my mind. Daniel, his silence at the party, his laugh, his refusal to defend Sophie. It wasn't just weakness, it felt like betrayal. And then I remembered something I had found a few days before. It had been early in the week, while folding laundry. Daniel's jacket was heavier than usual, something tucked in the inner pocket. I slipped my hand inside and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a hotel booking confirmation. The words were clear: London Marriott, Park Lane, 2 guests, weekend reservation. The date printed at the top sent a shiver down my spine. It matched the same week Margaret had purchased the clippers. The same week she prepared her cruelty, Daniel had been preparing something else. When I asked him about it that night, he didn't even blink. He shrugged and poured himself a drink. It was business. Don't go snooping through my things, Anna. Business. Always business. Except Daniel worked in Manchester, and his company hadn't sent him to London in months. He didn't even bother to make his lie convincing. The pit in my stomach deepened. I had learned long ago to listen to the silence between his words. He wasn't just lying. He was careless. Careless because he thought I would never challenge him. I tucked the booking slip away, hidden under my pillow that night. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe it was nothing. But then Margaret's cruelty struck, and I realized something. Betrayal rarely travels alone. If Margaret was planning her humiliation, Daniel was planning something too. Days after the birthday, while Sophie slept beside me, I searched again. Daniel wasn't careful with his things, and I was no longer afraid to look. In the inside pocket of his briefcase, tucked beneath spreadsheets and reports, I found another clue. A receipt from a restaurant in Soho, London. The paper was crisp, like it had been folded carefully. The receipt listed dinner for 2, steak, wine, dessert. At the bottom, written in neat ink, 1 red rose. My hands trembled as I read it. A rose. That wasn't business. That was intimacy. That was romance. That was a husband giving what he denied to me to someone else. I closed my eyes, flashes of memory crashing down. His late nights, the sudden business calls, the way he smiled into his phone when he thought I wasn't watching, it all fell into place. Daniel had mocked me for years, siding with his mother's cruelty, pretending I was the problem. And now, as my daughter cried herself to sleep with a bald head, he was sneaking roses onto another woman's table. I wanted to storm into the living room and confront him that moment, but I held back. I couldn't go in blind. Margaret had planned her cruelty carefully, and now I realized I had to plan just as carefully. I folded the receipt and slid it into the same envelope as the clipper slip. My evidence was growing, piece by piece. Margaret thought she had stripped my daughter of dignity. Daniel thought his lies were safe in London. Neither of them knew I was collecting, watching, waiting. And when I finally revealed what I knew, I would not just defend myself and Sophie, I would tear apart the fragile little kingdom they thought they controlled. I didn't know yet, but the rose wasn't the end of Daniel's secret. It was only the beginning, and soon the other woman herself would reach out to me.
The Soho receipt stayed heavy in my pocket, but the truth came crashing in faster than I expected. One evening, as I tucked Sophie into bed, my phone buzzed. A new message request on Instagram. The profile picture was of a young woman with striking features and a smile too confident to be innocent. Her name was Ella P. The first words made my stomach drop. I didn't know he was married. My hands shook as I scrolled down. Attached were photos. Ella leaning against Daniel's shoulder in the lobby of the London Marriott. Another of them sipping wine at a restaurant. The final one, a blurry selfie. Daniel's arm around her, his face lit with a grin I hadn't seen in years. I typed back quickly, my chest pounding. "Who are you?" Her reply came instantly. "I was seeing Daniel. He told me you were separated. He said you only stayed together for the child." The words burned. Separated? That was his story? To paint me as some woman clinging on while he played the charming man in London? Ella's next message was worse. He talked about you sometimes, about how you lived off money your father left. He said he didn't mind because, well, it kept the bills paid. My throat tightened. He hadn't just betrayed me with another woman, he had mocked the very sacrifice my father made, the legacy meant for Sophie's future. He was boasting about using me, turning my inheritance into the currency of his lies. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every suspicion I had, every fragment of proof, was now solid. Margaret had shaved my daughter's head for cruelty. Daniel had sold our dignity for roses and hotel sheets. But now I had something stronger than suspicion. I had her, Ella. And what she was about to give me next would turn my anger into a weapon sharp enough to cut them both down.
Ella's screenshots burned in my phone. Transfers from our joint account, hotel bills, gifts, all matching the days Daniel had business trips. She was right. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had funded it with money my father left behind. I needed proof that couldn't be denied. The next morning, I called my father's old solicitor in Charlton. He was slow and deliberate, the kind of man who had handled my father's estate for decades. When I explained, his voice grew heavy. "Anna, your husband has been making unauthorized withdrawal from the London Trust. Repeated amounts. Thousands. If this continues, the account will bleed out." I gripped the phone until my knuckles whitened. My father's legacy, the future I promised Sophie, stolen for hotel sheets and roses. But I wasn't done. That night, while Daniel showered, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A notification flashed across the screen. HR compliance, expense review. My pulse quickened. He had billed his company for London. When he left the room, I unlocked the phone with the code I had memorized years ago. I scrolled quickly, my hands trembling. There it was. An email chain between Daniel and HR. He had listed the Marriott stay as client relations. They wanted documentation. They were asking questions. I snapped photos of every message, my heart racing as water still ran in the shower. By the time Daniel returned, I was calmly flipping through Sophie's bedtime book. Later, in the quiet kitchen, I laid everything out. The Clippers receipt from Margaret, the trust withdrawals confirmed by the solicitor, the HR emails showing Daniel's fraud. Piece by piece, their fortress was crumbling. And as I stared at the pile of evidence, one thought cut sharper than rage. I couldn't waste this on private confrontations. Margaret would deny. Daniel would twist. Alone, they'd escape. Together, in front of witnesses, they would burn. That was when the plan came to me. A dinner. A gathering at Margaret's house. I would let them laugh, let them sit smugly at their own table, until the truth ripped through their pride like glass. They thought they had humiliated me, but soon they would be the ones stripped bare, and I would be the one holding the blade.
The evidence lay in a neat pile on the kitchen table. The Clippers receipt, the trust withdrawals, the HR compliance emails, and Ella's photos. Each piece was a blade. But used alone, they would only cut skin. Used together, they could tear through flesh and bone. I needed an audience. Margaret thrived on appearances. She cared more about how people saw her than how she treated her family. Daniel was the same. They lived for the illusion of respect. So, I decided to shatter it. 2 days later, I stood in Margaret's doorway, Sophie's small hand in mine. "I think we should talk," I told her, my voice calm. She studied me with suspicion, then smiled, believing she had won. That evening, I sent out invitations. Cousins, neighbors, even Sophie's school teacher. anyone who had stood silent while Margaret humiliated my child. I framed it as a peace dinner, a chance to move forward, to reconcile. The bait was sweet, and they all came. Margaret bustled about her kitchen on the chosen night, smug in her triumph. "She's glad you're finally learning your place," she told me quietly, arranging wine glasses on the table. Daniel smirked from the corner, his phone buzzing with messages he thought I couldn't see. I smiled back, hiding the storm beneath my calm. They believed I was crawling back. They believed I had bent. The table filled with chatter, laughter, clinking glasses. Sophie sat beside me, quiet, her eyes fixed on her plate. I touched her hand, steadying her. Tonight wasn't about fear. It was about justice. As the last dish was cleared, Margaret rose, preparing to deliver one of her practiced speeches about family unity. Her voice dripped with self-satisfaction as she welcomed the guests, her eyes sweeping the room like a queen, admiring her court. That was when I stood. "I'd like to share something too," I said, my voice steady. The room fell silent. Margaret's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, brittle and tight. Daniel raised an eyebrow, amused, thinking I was about to grovel. I walked to the television in the corner, the remote cold in my hand. My heart pounded, but my face betrayed nothing. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. The shaky footage filled the room with the sound none of them expected. The buzz of clippers, the laughter of guests, and the sobs of a 6-year-old girl in a yellow dress. Sophie. The room froze. Gasps rose from the table. The party they had all excused, minimized, laughed at. It was there, undeniable, unforgiving, in front of every pair of eyes. Margaret's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. And for the first time, her smile was gone. The living room fell into silence as the shaky video played. The sound of clippers buzzed through the speakers, followed by Sophie's trembling sobs. On screen, her yellow dress shimmered beneath the lights, her curls falling helplessly to the floor. Gasps rippled across the table. A cousin pressed her hand to her mouth. One of the neighbors muttered, "Oh my God!" Even Sophie's school teacher flinched, looking away. I watched Margaret's face as her carefully built mask cracked. Her lips trembled, but she forced a laugh. "Oh, come now," she said, her voice brittle. "It was just a bit of fun. She's a child. Hair grows back." The words hung in the air, sour and heavy. No one laughed with her this time. Sophie squeezed my hand under the table, her wide eyes fixed on the screen as if reliving the pain. I drew her close, my arm around her, never looking away from Margaret. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking as though the whole thing bored him. "Honestly, Anna, you're still dragging this out. It's just hair. You're embarrassing yourself." Embarrassing myself? The same words he had used before. My blood pounded in my ears, but I kept my voice calm. Embarrassment isn't mine to carry tonight. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Cousins whispered to one another. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. For the first time, the laughter was gone, replaced with shame that Margaret and Daniel could not shrug away. Margaret's voice wavered. "Really, this is ridiculous. You're making a scene." I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on her. "No, Margaret, you made a scene the moment you put those clippers to a 6-year-old's head." The room held its breath. I could feel the power shifting, the weight tilting at last in my favor.
Daniel rolled his eyes. Enough. Can we drop this now? But I was only just beginning. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my bag. The rustle of paper filled the silence. I laid a small folded slip on the table. The Clippers receipt. The guests leaned closer. I spoke clearly, each word a blade. This wasn't spontaneous. Margaret bought those Clippers 3 days before Sophie's birthday. This was planned. Margaret's face drained of color. Her hand trembled against her wineglass. The murmurs grew louder, judgment now aimed squarely at her. Before she could protest, I set down another paper, a hotel booking confirmation, the Marriott in London. 2 guests. The table erupted in whispers. Margaret's eyes darted to Daniel. His smirk faltered for the first time. I folded my hands, my voice steady. If you think Clippers and lies were the worst of it, you haven't seen anything. The room was already tense, whispers swirling around the table as the Clippers receipt and hotel booking lay exposed. Margaret sat frozen, her wineglass trembling in her hand. Daniel shifted in his chair, his smirk gone, his jaw tight. Then the doorbell rang. Every head turned. Margaret frowned, clearly not expecting anyone else. I rose calmly, my heart pounding, and walked to the door. When it swung open, gasps rippled from the table. Ella stood there, young, polished, confident, her dark hair falling neatly over her shoulders. She held her phone in one hand, her eyes burning with quiet anger. Daniel lurched to his feet. What the hell is she doing here? I smiled, stepping aside. She's here because she deserves to be. Ella walked into the room without hesitation, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She stopped by the table, glancing at Daniel, then turning to the others. I didn't know he was married, she said, her voice steady. He told me they were separated. He said they only stayed under the same roof for their daughter. The room exploded in murmurs. Margaret's face twisted with fury. Lies! She's lying! But Ella only laughed bitterly. Am I? I have photos. London Marriott. Soho restaurant. Does that sound like a business trip to you? Gasps spread like wildfire. Cousins leaned forward, eyes darting between Daniel and Ella. Neighbors exchanged sharp whispers. The schoolteacher shook her head in disgust. Daniel's face flushed deep red. Anna, this is insane. You brought her here? You're humiliating yourself. No, I said firmly, my voice cutting through his excuses. You humiliated yourself the moment you brought her into my marriage. Tonight, everyone will see it for what it is. Margaret slammed her hand against the table. Enough! This is a family matter. We don't need outsiders. Ella turned to her slowly. Outsiders? He promised me I'd be part of this family. He told me his wife was nothing but dead weight. Her words sliced sharper than any blade. Daniel lunged forward, reaching for her phone. Shut up, Ella. But she stepped back, holding it high. No, not tonight. Tonight, everyone learns the truth. She unlocked her screen with a swipe, her fingers fast. Here's proof of the gifts he bought. Not with his money, but with Anna's inheritance. I felt the air shift as gasps echoed around the room again. Margaret's hand fell to her lap, trembling. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. Ella held her phone out towards the table. Do you want to see how he bragged about it? I saved every message. The room was already in chaos. The video, the receipts, Ella's testimony. Whispers bounced from wall to wall like ricochets. Margaret sat stiff, her hands trembling. Daniel stood red-faced, glaring at me like a cornered animal. I let the noise build, then raised my hand. Silence fell. You've seen the humiliation. You've seen the lies. But now it's time you see the truth about what they claim is theirs. I reached into my folder and laid a stack of documents across the table. Solicitor letters, trust records, property deeds. I slid the top page forward, my voice calm but cutting. This house, it isn't Margaret's, it isn't Daniel's. My father left it under my name in his estate. Every chair you sit on, every wall around you, it belongs to me. Legally, fully. Gasps filled the room. A neighbor's eyes went wide. One of the cousins whispered, "What?" Margaret's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her hand clutched at her pearls, trembling. I pressed on. The money Daniel spends? Not his. The car he drives? Not his. The bank account he flaunts? All tied back to my father's London trust. Without me, they own nothing. Daniel slammed his fist onto the table. "You're lying!" I slid another document toward him. A solicitor statement, stamped and signed. "Read it. Or shall I?" His eyes flicked to the paper. He didn't touch it. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The silence was louder than any denial. Margaret finally found her voice. Shrill and broken. "You tricked us! You—" I cut her off. "No, Margaret, you tricked yourself. You thought cruelty was power. But power doesn't come from mocking a child. It comes from truth." The guests sat in stunned silence. The balance had shifted completely. No one looked at Margaret with respect now. No one looked at Daniel with admiration. They were stripped bare in their own home. Then, in the heavy quiet, a sound broke through. Buzz, buzz. Daniel's phone lit up on the table. Everyone's eyes turned to it. His hands shook as he reached for it, his face pale. The screen glowed with a notification. Suspension pending. HR compliance review. He fumbled to hide it, but it was too late. The words had been seen. The silence cracked into whispers, gasps, and sharp stares. I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm and final. And this is only the beginning.
Daniel's phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with another HR email. His hands shook as he slammed it face down on the table. Then he snapped. "This is your fault!" he shouted, pointing at me with wild eyes. "You've poisoned this family from the beginning, always playing the victim, always stirring trouble. None of this would have happened if you hadn't married into this house." The words ricocheted through the room. Gasps rose, but no one spoke. I stood slowly, keeping my voice calm. "Daniel, no one made you lie. No one made you steal. No one made you humiliate your daughter on her birthday. You did that all on your own." He shoved his chair back, his face flushed with rage. "You think you've won because you brought outsiders here? They don't know anything about our family." But before I could respond, Ella stepped forward, her voice sharp as glass. "Oh, we know plenty. I know you told me your wife was dead weight. I know you bragged about using her inheritance. I know you spent nights in London hotels while your daughter cried at home." The room erupted. Cousins murmured in disgust. Neighbors exchanged sharp stares. Even Margaret's closest friend shook her head, her lips tight with judgment. Daniel's fury crumbled into something smaller, desperation. He turned to Ella, reaching out as if to calm her. "Ella, please, don't." She stepped back, disgust in her eyes. "Don't touch me. You're pathetic." Margaret shot to her feet, her voice shrill. "Enough! You will not humiliate my son in front of family. You've all been manipulated. She's twisting everything." She pointed at me with shaking hands. "She doesn't belong here. She never did." But this time, no one supported her. The silence from the table was deafening. Eyes that once looked at Margaret with respect now saw her as cruel and small. A cousin finally spoke, his voice cold. You let your own granddaughter be mocked. You laughed at a child's pain. What kind of mother, what kind of grandmother does that? Margaret's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. Her power evaporated in front of her guests. I looked at both of them, Daniel with his trembling hands, Margaret with her hollow eyes, and I felt the shift. For years, they had painted me as the outsider, the weak one. Now the truth stood taller than both of them. But I wasn't finished. I leaned forward, my voice steady, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. This is just the beginning. You think public shame is the worst thing you'll face? No. You're going to pay for every tear my daughter shed. You'll face more than humiliation. You'll face consequences. Daniel's fists clenched, his mother silent as the guests looked on in stunned silence. And none of them could guess what I planned next. The dining room sat in stunned silence. Margaret had no words left. Daniel's fury had burned into hollow desperation. And for the first time in years, the weight of their cruelty shifted fully onto them. But I wasn't finished. I opened one last envelope and laid a single document on the table. You've humiliated my daughter. You've stolen from me. But now you'll face the law. It was a solicitor's notice, the first step in legal proceedings: fraud, misappropriation of trust funds, property seizure. Daniel's face went ashen as he scanned the words. You wouldn't dare. I already have, I said, my voice calm. Gasps rippled around the room. Cousins leaned in, neighbors whispered, and Margaret's lips parted in shock. Her hand shook as she reached for her son's arm, but Daniel pulled away, his eyes wild. Then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, his phone buzzed again. He hesitated, then turned it over. The words on the screen glared at him like a death sentence. Suspension confirmed. Immediate termination under review. The room erupted with murmurs. Daniel staggered back, his chest heaving, his empire collapsing piece by piece. Sophie tugged on my sleeve, her voice small but steady. Mummy, can we go home now? I smiled at her, brushing a hand over her bald head. Yes, darling, we're going home. And this time, no one will take it from us. Margaret slumped into her chair, staring at the shards of her wineglass on the floor. Daniel stood frozen, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between me and Ella, between the papers and the stares of his guests. But I left them with one last truth, my words sharp enough to cut through every lie. This isn't the first thing he's stolen, and it won't be the last story you hear. Because this is the same man who sold my late father's Rolex just to take his girlfriend on a luxury vacation. Gasps filled the room again, the new revelation crackling like fire in dry wood. Faces turned from shock to outrage, whispers spilling into the air. Daniel's eyes widened in horror and said, Anna, don't. But it was too late. The seed was planted. The next chapter of betrayal was already unfolding, and everyone at that table would carry the story forward. I gathered Sophie in my arms and walked toward the door, my head high. For the first time in years, the weight was gone. Justice wasn't complete, but it had begun. And as the door closed behind us, one thought burned in my mind. This wasn't the end. This was only part one. And that was how Sophie and I finally broke free from their cruelty. But betrayal doesn't stop at one story. It takes many forms in many lives. So before you go, let me leave you with this question. What would you do if your husband sold your late father's Rolex just to take his girlfriend on a luxury vacation? That's the story we're telling next. Don't miss it. Next video drops soon, turn on notifications so you don't miss it.